Hello friends, it's good to be back. Let us discuss the topic on international trade and international inequality. In this session, we will discuss the role of foreign trade in economic development of a nation. Classical economists propounded theories that explain the profitability and gains from trade. It has been noted from experience of countries that trade has several direct and indirect benefits for developed as well as for less developed countries. Let us list down the objectives of today's session. First, review the classical theory of trade. Second, understand the direct and indirect gains from trade for developing and developed countries. Third, check the trends of world trade. Fourth, understand if trade helps in establishing a more equal world. And fifth, understand the dynamics of export-led growth strategy. Let us review and remember trade in classical theory. According to classical theorists, trade has an impelling effect on development which can be explained by forwarding various arguments as: first, the surplus land and labor can be utilized to produce goods for exchange in the foreign market. Second, the unemployed resources can get employed in the production of exportable goods. Third, if a country already produces surplus goods, that is, enough demand does not exist in the home country for certain goods, those can be sold abroad in exchange of more necessary goods. A country may also exchange her less necessary goods for more necessary goods by regulating the demand for less necessary goods in the home country. For example, a country may have some iron ore reserves and may be producing steel for domestic use. This country may regulate her own demand for steel and save some steel for export against her imports of petrol. By using their unused resources or by reorganizing production, if countries can create exportable surplus, they can increase their gains by importing essential intermediate goods which they cannot produce at home. In a way, when a country buys cheaper and or better intermediate goods in international market and replace them for the more expensive and inferior quality of domestic goods, the terms of trade for this country are said to have improved. Sixth, when countries can utilize their unused resources by engaging them in production for trade, they can consume more goods than before, as well as when the international exchange ratio is more favorable than the domestic exchange ratio, then the real gains and real incomes both tend to increase. Friends, what are the determinants of the pattern of trade in theory of economics? The pattern of trade in economic theory is determined by A. Comparative cost advantage, B. Demand intensity for imports and relative bargaining capacities of trading countries, and C. Factor endowments and factor prices in the trading countries. According to these theories, the trading countries can enjoy higher real incomes through trade even when there is no increase in their resources or even when there is no technological progress. Let us now see the dynamic or the indirect gains from trade. Along with the direct benefits or gains, trade also has dynamic or indirect benefits. Gerald Mayer classifies these as A. Those that pertain to widening of markets inducing innovations and increasing productivity, B. Those which increase savings and capital formation, C. Those which promote education, awareness, instill new tastes and preferences or alter preferences which lead to improvement in life conditions, as well as those which transfer technology, develop skills and entrepreneurship. According to the classical theory, trade is beneficial not just to the developed countries which have surplus production to sell, but also to the developing countries which have underutilized resources or untapped natural resources. Developing countries also attain more indirect benefits. Let us now review the trade benefits explained in the theory of economic development. The theory of economic growth and development has given convincing relevance to the role of trade in growth and development of nations. First, let us see the staple theory of growth, which emphasizes that developing countries may find vent for their unexploited or surplus staple resources through trade. They may exchange their resources for other goods or may buy technology from foreign markets to exploit and use their resources for growth and development. This is akin to Arthur Lewis's model of growth, where he emphasizes upon the transfer of labor from the less productive use to the more productive use. The staple theory also hints at improving the productivity of resources. The staple theory is also said to be similar to Rostow's leading sector theory. The staple sector can well be the leading sector whose growth can propel the growth of other sectors of the economy. Second, Mayer mentions in his book W. Max Cordon's supply motored model of growth, which brings out 5 distinguishing effects of trade on development. The first effect is the impact effect, which is like the static effect explained by an increase in real income which occurs because of trade. Second effect is the capital accumulation effect, which occurs when the static gain in the form of increased real income is invested. Thus, when investment is made by curtailing consumption in the current period, there is a transfer of real income from the present to the future. Thirdly, there may be a relatively greater fall in prices of investment goods than in the prices of consumption goods because of 2 reasons. A. When more capital is imported, the supply of capital goods in the home country grows. And B. When the trade induced increased incomes are invested in domestic economy, the supply of capital goods increases. This way, the ratio of investment to consumption rises and the rate of growth increases. Fourthly, there will be an income distribution effect towards the export oriented sector. Investments in export oriented sector will increase and the income of factors which are used intensively in the export sector will rise. When exports tend to raise the real income and growth, the society will invest more in this sector. Fifthly, there will be the factor weight effect, which means that in a constant return production function, if exports are produced by using more of the abundant and faster growing factor in the country, then the rate of growth of exports will be much higher as the surplus units of the abundant factor are used to produce the exportable goods. Third, let us also see the factor price equalization theorem of the neoclassical trade theory. The neoclassical trade theory stated that free trade promotes perfect mobility of factors across boundaries and thus the prices of factors and products are equalized in the trading countries. The classical theory stated that even when factors are immobile across countries, trade will equalize factor prices through the investment process. Investments will increase in the production of export goods and domestic industry will make greater use and demand of the abundant factor which will raise its price. And price of the less demanded scarce factor of production will then tend to fall. Let us now see the criticisms levelled against the assumptions of trade benefits explained in the classical and the neoclassical theories of trade. First, the comparative cost advantage theory is static and does not consider the dynamics of real trade. However, the theory is still relevant in understanding the reasons for trade. Second, according to some critics, the factor prices are not equalized in trade, but rather the inequalities increase. Now, let us review some trends of world trade. Between 1850 and 1913, the world trade increased tenfold in real volume, which was twice as fast as the increase in world production. This growth was attributed to specialization in production. Britain and the countries around British Empire took a major share. The low income countries experienced a typical lopsided growth pattern. Production of primary products for exports was carried out by using foreign capital, while the rest of the domestic economy remained far more less developed. Thus, these countries started developing into dual economies arising from investment for trade. However, owing to cyclical fluctuations in production of export goods, the growth of these countries was irregular. From 1913 till around mid 1980s, the quantum of world trade increased little less than world production. This was owing to restrictive trade policies as well as owing to use of new technologies by the developed world. The terms of trade significantly moved in favor of developed countries. Between 1913 and 1950, Europe's terms of trade improved 55% against the poorer countries. Between 1980 and 2011, developing economies raised their share in world exports from 34% to 47% and their share in world imports from 29% to 42%. Asia is playing an increasing role in world trade. This is attributed to increasing incomes, expansion of markets, increasing manufacturing capacity of the developing countries, and a slowdown in the economic growth of the developed world. International supply chains have also improved, helping the developing countries to increase their trade. Let us discuss if trade helps to establish a more equal world. It may be natural to ask if trade directly creates equality. There cannot be one answer to this question. Trade benefits countries that are able to create investments favoring the poor from the real income which trade helps to earn. According to Mayer, economic development is a process of circular and cumulative causation, and trade may help the already well endowed countries more, while the efforts of the poorer countries may be thwarted if they have poor physical and financial infrastructure, policies which fail to provide equal opportunities, poor education systems and beliefs which pose impediments to development. Trade results in greater development in countries where national economic integration is greater. The quality of factors is poor in countries with high economic and social inequalities, and effectiveness of their production efforts is also low. Trade fails to equalize remuneration of factors, thus disproving the factor price equalization theory of trade. Rather, trade aggravates the economic divide. It will award the efforts of those factors which are skilled and thwart the efforts of those which are unskilled. In other words, the sectors with fair amount of technology and skill sets will be able to export their goods and increase their incomes, while the backward sectors will remain poorer. Countries with large markets and a relatively developed industry will be rewarded with better consumer welfare and transfer of technology and knowledge by trade. Small and less developed industries of poorer countries will be competed away by foreign industries and trade. Hence, such countries may be impoverished further. Countries which export only primary sector goods may face inelastic demand in the international market, and if their demand for industrial imports is high, they may face a balance of payments deficit. Thus, trade does not benefit the growth of these countries, rather trade results in external debt. Let us understand the concept of inelastic demand. Countries of the world do not depend much on other countries for their staple food requirement, and the demand for agricultural goods is limited as these goods have limited industrial applications. Hence, when the price of these goods falls in the international market, the demand expands in a lesser proportion than the fall in price. Thus, inelastic demand results in a reduction in total revenue when prices are lowered. The factor trade between rich and poor countries during the 1960s and the 1970s led to brain drain from developing countries and to the sale of obsolete technology at high prices to the developing countries by the developed countries. This hindered the growth and development process of the developing countries. External debts of many developing countries rose to threatening levels, and these countries were forced by the developed world to globalize to fulfill their debt obligations. Let us now understand the major issues in an export-led development strategy. Developing countries that tried to develop their export sector by borrowing capital from abroad aggravated the economic divide under the dual economic structures. Export-led development is more beneficial to countries which have more equitable distribution of opportunities and have undertaken large-scale skill formation programs, have well-developed credit systems for setting up export-oriented units, and which have necessary infrastructure and inputs for the growth of export industry. Friends, we may wrap up this lecture by ascertaining that trade definitely helps the developing countries to develop more. However, the gains will depend upon the nature of commodities traded, the mobility of factors, the productivity of the underutilized resources in a country, and so on. We must recollect at the end of this session the theories of international trade, especially the theory of comparative cost advantage and the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. Friends, that's all for this